Out in Japan, we have the case of a multi-millionaire with an extreme obsession with white women, leading him on a crime spree that would ultimately consist of 400 different victims, some of them living through their ordeal and some of them not. Here we have a case from out in Japan, a case that gained a lot of notoriety due to being a string of extremely heinous crimes with victims numbering in the hundreds. It managed to gain a lot of attention due to involving people from nations all over the world. It's a case that brought Japan a lot of shame when it came to light that one of their own wealthy philanthropist businessmen, who on the outside was polite and well put together, was actually a horrible deranged criminal. Born on August 10th of 1952, Kim Sung-jong was born to two Korean parents residing in Japan since the end of the war. His father had worked his way up in society, starting out as a mere scrap collector and ending up as an extremely wealthy property owner and pachinko parlor proprietor. Due to this, Kim was able to enter into some very prestigious private schools in Tokyo. Not only that, he got some nice private tutoring in a whole variety of different subjects. When he was 15, he entered into a very prestigious prep school that was affiliated with Keio University, basically making it all but certain that he would be able to enter into the university. But just 2 years later, Kim was hit with a sudden shock. His father had passed away in Hong Kong. It isn't known how his father died, however it has been speculated that it might have been due to his ties to the criminal underworld. However, due to this, Kim was able to inherit his father's properties in Osaka and Tokyo, and in turn, his fortune. He entered into Keio University, taking a course in politics and law, and worked his way up to becoming a naturalized Japanese citizen. When he did, he changed his name to Seisho Hoshiyama, wanting to feel fully Japanese and avoid any possible discrimination. Over time, he became fluent in English and spent a lot of his off time living in both the United States and Sweden. He began to have a little too much fun. Not only was he high on his newfound fortune, he was also high on actual drugs. Kim, now Seisho, soon became a very avid drug user. While abroad, he developed a fascination. More than a fascination, it was an obsession, a fetish for white women. Seisho, wanting to completely shed his Korean appearance entirely, had plastic surgery around his eyes to make him look what he felt was less Korean. Being only about 5'5", he started wearing elevator shoes in order to make himself look taller, even going as far as acquiring some growth hormones in an attempt to increase his size. Getting more into business, he decided to change his name one more time, this time to Joji Obara. Joji used his father's fortune to his advantage, hopping onto the Japanese property development boom in the late 80s and early 90s. He invested a good chunk of his money into real estate speculation, which paid off at the time, increasing his net worth to something in the ballpark of $38 million. Joji did not live modestly. He wanted to display that wealth. He owned multiple apartments in multiple cities, driving several different luxury cars in between them. He had a Maserati, a Ferrari, and even a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud. By the early to mid-90s, his fortune was growing even more, hitting a peak of about $45 million. However, the bubble soon burst in Japan. In the 90s, the country fell into a recession, and much of that was due to the real estate bubble. Joji fell into debt that he couldn't quite climb out of. So, much like his father, he turned to shady criminal organizations, namely the Yakuza, in order to get some cash. They got him into the money laundering scene, and needless to say, Joji was negatively influenced even more by their criminal nature. Joji Obara began to let his drug-fueled fetish fantasies take control of him. He began to lash out at women, desiring nothing but physical pleasure from them. While he did victimize Japanese women, he set most of his focus on any foreign women that he could find in the country. To be more specific, foreign white women. Joji began to invite these women out on dates. There, he would unknowingly drug them, usually either by putting something into their drink, but sometimes by going as far as using chloroform to knock them unconscious. Then, he would abduct them and have his way with them. He would record his attacks on video nearly every single time he would commit them. It's believed that he repeated this MO with 150 women at the very least, 400 at the most. Joji wrote in his diaries that this was his conquest play, saying that women were only good for sex and that he wanted revenge on the world, likely referring to his debts. Carita Simone Ridgway was an Australian model from Claremont in Perth. Carita wanted to move on from modeling and make her way into the acting scene. To do so, she planned on going to acting school, but in order to do that, she was going to need a good chunk of change to pay for it. She decided to head out to Tokyo to teach English. However, upon entering the country, she found that working at a bar as a hostess was a much more lucrative career. A host or hostess in Japan in this context is someone who works at a bar and entertains guests of the opposite sex. Usually this just involves flirtatious conversation, drinking, or just hanging out and encouraging the guest to buy more drinks. While there is usually a very strict restriction on sexual contact or touching of any kind, it isn't uncommon for the patrons to buy gifts for the hostesses or even invite them to outside events. On February 14th of 1992, Carita was invited to one of these events herself along with several other hostesses. While they all enjoyed a nice dinner together, one of the other hostesses noticed that Carita was leaving the restaurant with an older man. While the bars were very safe and had a lot of security, the establishment had no control over what happened outside their doors. Later on that night, her housemates, one of which was her own sister, got a message that Carita had chosen to go away for the weekend. In reality, Carita had been offered a ride home by none other than Joji Obara. In the car, he surprised her with a chloroform-soaked rag. However, he used far too much of the drug, obviously not understanding the strength of it. Upon getting back to his home, Carita was knocked out cold, and she didn't wake up. The chloroform had resulted in complete liver failure and brain death. The next morning, Joji decided to take her to the hospital, claiming that she had eaten an oyster and suffered a horrible allergic reaction. That morning, Carita's housemates got one more call, this time telling them that Carita had been admitted. Carita's sister rushed out to the hospital to be with her, being told that a Japanese man named Akira Nishida had dropped her off. They relayed the oyster story to her, and at the time there wasn't much reason not to believe it. It didn't appear that she had suffered any outside injuries after all. As Carita laid there in a coma, the man who called himself Akira called her sister numerous times, telling her again and again the story of how she had eaten the shellfish and gotten sick. However, when they asked for a better way to contact him or to meet him in person, he would politely refuse each and every time. At her family's request, Carita was taken off of life support. She quickly passed away. She was cremated and taken back to Australia, notably without an autopsy ever being performed. While the family requested a further investigation into Akira Nishida, there was no support from either the Australian embassy or the Japanese police. Once they heard she was a hostess, they basically lost all interest. The case died then and there, and it appeared that Carita's suspicious death would forever remain shrouded in doubt. When getting ready to head back to Australia themselves, Carita's family had a very strange encounter at their airport hotel. This was where the man known as Nishida came to meet them, seemingly very nervous, and offered to pay for her funeral. He once more reiterated the story about the oysters and how sorry he was. Then, strangely, he gave them both a diamond ring and a necklace he had bought for their daughter, likely a present he was going to give her at her hostess job. After that, Joji Obara mainly stayed out of the limelight for years. That is, until 1998, when he was caught dressing in women's clothes in order to enter into female bathrooms and record the women in there on video. There, he was hit with some light charges. They were notably his first criminal charges, but they would not be the last. Carita wasn't the only foreign woman to come to Tokyo and end up working as a hostess by any means. That industry has the potential to make some pretty good money from the get-go, even more so if you're exotic or you stand out from the crowd in one way or another. Because of this, there was no shortage of women out there for predators with this line of interest to prey upon. Lucy Jane Blackman was a young British woman from Kent who was also working as a hostess in Tokyo. She had previously been working as a flight attendant for British Airways, but she had slowly grown tired of the long-haul international flights. She wanted to see the world and earn some money to pay off her debts. This is where she ended up in Japan, finding her way out to Tokyo with her friend Louise. They set out to make some new experiences and hopefully get some money. Now 21 years old, Lucy found work while on her 90-day tourist visa. She quickly found out that working as a hostess could be a very lucrative gig and had the potential to get her some nice money. She stood out, being tall and blonde, becoming a very exotic addition to the bar that employed her. She quickly became very popular with Japanese men, especially the ones interested in foreign women in particular. Lucy and her friend's base pay was roughly $50 an hour, and that's not including all of the bonuses and gifts they tended to receive. For anyone outgoing who liked the nightlife in the first place, it didn't even feel like a job to them. It was like getting paid to hang out and socialize. Lucy was working at a nightclub called Casablanca, which was later known as Greengrass, in a very lively area of Tokyo called Roppongi. This was when a regular customer who had a keen interest in her invited her on what is called a dohan, basically a paid date. Usually this is just out to dinner or something like that, but this time was a bit different. Lucy told her friend Louise that this particular customer had offered to get a prepaid cell phone for her if she were to accompany him on a date to the beach near his home. This was a big deal because at the time, foreign nationals who weren't living in Japan long-term couldn't legally obtain a cell phone in the country. While Louise was still in bed, Lucy left on July 1st to go on that date. Louise woke up slightly, seeing Lucy wearing sandals with a nice black sundress along with a silver necklace with hearts. They all had plans to hang out together that evening, along with Louise's American boyfriend, but it would never happen. That would be the last time Louise would ever see her. Lucy did call her 3 times over the course of the day, however. The first call was at 1:30 to say that she had met up with her lunch date. Then she called again at 5 p.m. to say she was being taken out to sea. Then, one more time at 7 p.m., she called to say that she would be home in half an hour. She called Louise's boyfriend as well to relay the same message. But nobody ever heard a word from her ever again. Joji Obara went through his usual routine with Lucy, a routine that he was well accustomed to by this point. He spiked her wine and, when she fell unconscious, he proceeded to have his way with her for hours and hours. Lucy never came home and her friends grew very concerned. The day after she vanished, Louise received a phone call from a strange man, saying that Lucy had joined a strange religious cult and that she didn't want to be contacted for the foreseeable future. The man, speaking English in a thick Japanese accent, told her that Lucy was now a member of a newly founded up-and-rising cult training in a hut out in Chiba. It goes without saying that Louise, knowing her own friend, immediately knew something was up. She called Lucy's sister back in England, who immediately flew out to help look for her. They went to the police together, but upon explaining that they worked as hostesses, the police scoffed at them. The police said that women in such lines of work would often run off to Thailand or Bali on a whim to play with their boyfriends. White hostesses were looked down on particularly badly at the time, having a reputation of being both illegals and/or prostitutes. 4 days later, the police near Joji Obara's home got a call from the manager of his condominium. They made their way out to the Miura Peninsula, hearing that one of the tenants had been making a whole lot of noise the day prior, a suspicious amount of noise. Knocking on the door to the apartment, the police came to see Joji, naked from the waist up and incredibly sweaty. They asked for permission to take a look around his apartment, and he reluctantly let them in. There were chunks of cement all around the entrance to the apartment and strewn about the inside as well. There was also some sort of large bag in the back room and what appeared to be some sort of garden hoe or shovel. When asked what all of this was, Joji responded that he had been removing tiles in the apartment. With all of the cement, this made sense to them. They asked to see the bathroom as well, to which Joji argued, "You've already seen enough." He started to grow more annoyed at their questioning, and eventually the officers got tired of talking to him and left. At this point, the police had no idea whatsoever of Lucy, a Tokyo resident's disappearance, and had no reason to doubt Joji in particular. The rest of Lucy's family flew out to Tokyo and did their best to start a high-profile campaign within the media in order to find their daughter and sister. Lucy's family, with her father at the lead, held a large press conference in Tokyo. The media response was so intense, beyond their expectations, that they had to rent out one of the largest auditoriums they could find. They were finally getting the attention to the case that they needed. The British media took to the case as well. As not much was known about the case yet, the British media in particular began to speculate wildly as to what may have happened, spreading all manner of rumors about her. The sheer amount of attention and focus on the case did, however, force the Japanese police to move. They decided to take their case to the British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, who was conveniently in Tokyo at the time. Within only a few weeks, newspapers were writing of Lucy's disappearance, and Tony Blair even brought up the case during a visit to Japan when he spoke to the then Prime Minister. But by the time he talked with Tony Blair, though, Lucy had already been missing for 20 days. The longer this went on, the worse the prospects looked. The Prime Minister promised him that the suspect would be caught any time now. But the thing is, he was basing this statement on nothing. The police had given him no reason to think that they were anywhere close to solving this case or that Lucy was even still alive. It was purely a political move. Soon after, though, the police were pretty sure that they had their suspect, a man who frequented hostess bars and took a keen interest in foreign women. They used a lot of man-hours to track him down, lure him in, and take him in for questioning. But in the end, they had the wrong man. They had used up a lot of valuable time in the early days of Lucy being missing by chasing the wrong guy. A group of British expats in Japan decided to cobble together an information hotline. In addition, an anonymous businessman offered up a reward of £100,000 to anyone who could help find Lucy. Tim attempted to put up missing persons posters all around Tokyo, to which the police would protest from time to time, telling him that you can only put posters on certain poles in certain areas. They told him that you couldn't just put them anywhere. Tim had a good back and forth with the police for quite some time, butting heads with them more often than he would have liked. One day, another foreign woman with a lifestyle very similar to Lucy's was approached by an older Japanese man at her club. This man offered to take her out on a date with him to the seaside. Her memory the next day was fuzzy. She had fallen asleep at some point and was out for a very long time, waking up with a splitting headache. She wasn't naive and immediately assumed that she had probably been drugged. She reported this incident to the manager at her club, hoping to get that man investigated. The police, however, felt that the club owner who reported this wasn't a trustworthy man and tossed his report aside. But more and more club owners began to speak up, saying that their female employees had gone through the same experience. The police were forced to come to the conclusion that there had been a predator on the streets of Roppongi for years, right under their nose, being reported again and again, and they hadn't done anything about it. Upon hearing about the case, 3 different foreign women came forward to tell their stories. Each had gone on a date with an older Japanese man, only to wake up sore and sick in his bed the next morning with no memory of anything that had happened the night prior. Each of them had been told that the man went by a different name, but they were confident it was the same guy. They had actually gone to the Roppongi police, but they were ignored there as well. Some others were actually living in the country illegally and couldn't go to the police at risk of being deported, something Joji likely knew very well. Joji Obara thought he had it all figured out, but he still didn't quite understand the strength of chloroform. He would most often drug his victims' wine at first, but he would frequently use the chloroform to render them unconscious once more if they were to ever wake up during the assault. It's widely believed that Lucy died in the same manner as Karita, never to wake up from her dosage of chloroform. The police, after international pressure, were finally motivated to search for Lucy. Several months into their search, they got a letter claiming to be from her. The letter said, "I am doing what I want, so please leave me alone." The police naturally didn't believe this letter to be legitimate. The police decided to look back at the previous reports that they had gotten about the predator running rampant at hostess clubs in Roppongi. This brought them back to the original woman who made the complaint with her supposedly untrustworthy club owner. The woman, who was from Australia, had written down her assailant's name and phone number in a notebook. She had since moved back home, so the police asked for the notebook to be sent to them. Of course, the criminal had used a fake name, but they were able to trace the phone number. When they pulled up the call logs, they found that one of the outgoing calls was made to none other than Lucy's phone. They were able to trace the phone calls currently being made by the phone, and with the help of some previous victims, this would ultimately lead them to Joji Obara. In October of 2000, Joji hit the end of the road. When the police came to his door, his face went pale. He knew immediately that the jig was up. After a short while, they were able to get a search warrant and gain access to Joji's properties. There, they came across an absolute mountain of pornographic videos. Among them, they found some, a lot of videos that seemed to be homemade. Upon watching them, they came to see a very amateur video of a man in a Zorro-style mask assaulting numerous amounts of different unconscious women. That wasn't the only discovery they made. Strangely enough, they also found the frozen body of Joji's favorite dog, his German Shepherd, covered in roses. They also found a very long, detailed journal. In this journal, Joji wrote about all of his darkest fantasies, feelings, and thoughts. In them, he said that he, quote, cannot do women who are conscious. He added, women are only good for sex. I will lie on them. I will seek revenge. Revenge on the world. Foreign hostesses are all ugly. Not in the sense of appearance, but in their minds. A search of a different home turned up a different journal, one riddled with different memos and scribbles. One of these read, Carita Ridgway, too much chloroform. When going through all of the videotapes, they indeed found a video of Carita showing exactly what they had feared. They also came across a receipt for Carita's funeral expenses. Joji Obara was quickly arrested and charged with Carita's murder. It wasn't long before her family was able to identify him as the man known as Nishida that they had met almost a decade prior. The police continued to search all of his properties for quite some time. This was when, at the Miura property, they came across something strange. They found an overturned bathtub in a cave near the ocean only a few hundred meters from Joji's apartment. Moving the bathtub, they came across a shallow grave. Within this grave, they found the body of Lucy Blackman, in 10 different pieces in separate bags. Then they found her shaved head encased in a block of concrete. However, the remnants of long blonde hair were unmistakable. Unfortunately, the body had decomposed far too much to determine a cause of death. Police believe that Joji Obara had done the deed with a chainsaw. They had observed it at his apartment during their first meeting, but it vanished shortly after. They did, however, find the receipt for the chainsaw. About 2 months later, Joji Obara was finally charged with Lucy Blackman's kidnapping, murder, mutilation, and abandonment in the cave. In his indictment, it was stated that he drugged her drink before forcing himself on her and ultimately killing her. Joji continued to claim that he was innocent, saying that any drugs she had taken were taken voluntarily. By the time the police had documented all of his homemade videos, they feared that he may have been involved in the abuse of up to 400 different women at the most, dating far back as 1972. In his journals, he stated that he wanted to have his way with 500 women by the time he was 50 years old. Sometimes his videos would last up to 12 hours with one single victim, with the victim both tied up and unconscious. All of his homes contain substantial amounts of sedatives, roofies, GHB, and, of course, chloroform. Ultimately, Joji Obara was also charged with assaulting some other women along with Carita and Lucy. He pled not guilty despite being confronted with absolute mountains of evidence. As Japan doesn't have a trial by jury, it was up to a panel of judges to listen to the evidence and decide upon a punishment. Little did they know, Joji had studied the legal system fairly thoroughly. He denied even knowing any of the victims at first. Then he claimed that all of the women in the videos were prostitutes and consensually agreed to what he did in order to get paid. Joji managed to waste a good chunk of time by doing this, years in fact. But by April of 2007, he was finally found guilty on multiple sexual assault and manslaughter charges. He was given a solid life sentence, never to see the outside of a jail cell again. He was, unfortunately however, acquitted of Lucy Blackman's assault and murder, being that there was a lack of concrete evidence. Despite the mountain of VHS tapes, a video of Lucy's assault was never found. With Carita, a test at the hospital had shown traces of chloroform in her liver, and a paper trail was produced that showed he was the man who accompanied her to the hospital. In Lucy's case, though, they weren't able to come up with any direct evidence that would link him to her death. Although her body was found near his home, there was nothing putting him specifically at the scene of the crime beyond common sense. Not only that, her cause of death was never able to be determined. Naturally, it goes without saying that Lucy's family was not happy with this outcome, with her father, Tim, saying that his daughter was robbed of justice. Tim was soon approached by a friend of Joji's, offering £450,000 in compensation for Lucy's death. Lucy's mother and everybody else in the family was opposed to accepting the money, calling it blood money. Tim decided to take it, however, and this drew him a lot of criticism. However, in Japan, this is actually something fairly common called mimaikin, or condolence money. It's usually given to the family of the victim by the family of the perpetrator in order to make up for what their family member has done, at least a little bit. Afterwards, a trust was established in Lucy's name using some of this money. The trust would promote personal safety, especially while abroad. However, the rest of Lucy's family still wasn't happy, calling Tim's acceptance of the money an utter betrayal. Lucy's sister even attempted to end her own life in 2005, shortly after Lucy's ashes were interred, simply because she couldn't handle the grief. In the end, though, she did survive. Prosecutors in Japan, like Takeshi Tsushimoto, heavily criticized the decision to acquit Joji Obara of Lucy's murder, citing other cases in which large amounts of circumstantial evidence were enough to get killers locked away. The public prosecutor appealed the verdict as well, causing an appeal trial at the Tokyo High Court in 2008. This time, they finally found Joji Obara guilty of the abduction, dismemberment, and disposal of Lucy's body. Joji attempted to appeal this decision himself, but the Supreme Court of Japan shot it down and upheld his life sentence. Lucy's mother spoke out about the appeal trial, saying, "This has been a harrowing ordeal, not just for today, but for over 8 years. But at last we have 2 guilty verdicts and a life sentence. Today, truth and honor have prevailed, not only for Lucy, but for all victims of violent sexual crime." Lucy's father, Tim, told the news media, "It is fantastic and completely unexpected and no less than Lucy deserves. It sounds churlish to say it's a pity that this didn't happen years ago because it's been such a long haul, such a merciless torture. But for the police and prosecutors to get him like this is a great achievement." To this day, both the Japanese police and judicial system receive heavy criticism for their poor handling of this massive case. It's widely accepted by virtually everyone that the police didn't take the missing person case seriously enough due to their prejudices against hostesses. It's because of this that it took so long to find her body, and in turn, it was impossible to find a cause of death. Not only that, but the police leaked crucial information about the case to the media as the investigation was ongoing, leading to further scrutiny. Today, it isn't known exactly where Joji Obara is, despite the fact that he's serving his life sentence out there within a prison in Japan. He's still alive, presumably alive and well, living up to the age of 71. Something that can't be said of an unknown number of his victims. Once again everyone, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. If you don't mind, go ahead and follow me on social media, because if anything were to ever happen to this channel, again, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. If you want to support the channel even further, which I really appreciate, I do have a Patreon account which I always keep linked down in the description below. There you can find videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are now up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Be safe out there everyone. This has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.